The stars had always seemed distant, silent, and peaceful, until the day they spoke. A strange signal echoed across the void, picked up by satellites orbiting Mars and relayed back to Earth. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't curiosity. It was a demand. A cold, emotionless voice spoke in perfect English, calling itself a representative of the Jatari Union, a name no human had ever heard before. The message was simple. You will surrender all planetary control to the Jatari Union. Resistance is not advised. You have 7 days. The signal repeated every hour on the hour, stretching across all known frequencies. Panic surged across the globe. Governments met in emergency sessions while military satellites turned their eyes to the stars. Earth's Defense Coalition, a fragile alliance formed after humanity's first brush with alien signals decades earlier, came together in hurried talks, but nothing in their arsenal could match the threat of an unknown galactic power. Stories about the Jatari surfaced quickly, gathered from intercepted signals and scattered fragments found in deep space probes. They were conquerors, known for leaving behind hollowed-out worlds and broken civilizations. Their empire stretched across dozens of systems, and no species had ever resisted them for long. As fear rippled through cities and news networks broadcast endless theories, there was one group that remained quiet: Earth's Advanced Defense. Division. Unknown to the public, they had been working in secret for years on a weapon not meant for Earth, but for space. A single ship, a prototype, the HSS Invictus. Anchored in lunar orbit, the massive vessel was unlike anything ever built by human hands. Wrapped in a sleek shell of layered alloys and equipped with experimental tech scavenged from ancient Martian ruins, it was humanity's last and only secret card. No one knew if it could fly, let alone fight. It hadn't even passed its full systems test. But when Earth's leaders debated surrender or war, the Invictus began to move. Dr. Adrian Voss, the brilliant but reclusive scientist behind the ship's core systems, gave no press conference. There was no grand speech, only silence. As the deadline approached and the skies remained clear, the people of Earth waited, holding their breath. Then, with no warning, the stars shifted. Not from the Jatari, but from Earth. A pulse went out, too faint to be seen with the naked eye, a silent ripple through space. It wasn't a weapon. It was a signal. A message not for surrender, but defiance. The Invictus had spoken, not in words, but through its presence alone. The ship, now fully operational, broke its lunar orbit and turned toward deep space, leaving behind a faint blue trail as it vanished into the void. Humanity had given no reply to the Jatari's demand. And yet, the silence said more than words ever could. They were not backing down. Something had changed. For the first time, the galaxy would learn that Earth was not just a blue dot waiting to be conquered. It was a world ready to fight back. And somewhere in the cold darkness beyond the moon, the Invictus waited, not with fear, but with purpose. The sky above Earth turned into a field of stars that moved, not peacefully, but with purpose. They were not stars at all, but warships. Thousands of them. The Jatari Armada had arrived. Stretching across the edge of the solar system like a wall of steel and fire, over 3,000 ships came into formation, each one a fortress of its own. Long-range scans showed energy readings far beyond anything Earth had ever witnessed before. They carried weapons capable of turning cities into craters, machines built not for warning shots but for total erasure. The Jatari had not come to talk. They had come to end the story of humanity in a single blow. Across Earth, people watched from bunkers and shelters as news anchors struggled to remain calm. Satellites tracked the fleet's movements, and every major military force went on high alert. But none of it mattered. Only one thing stood in the Jatari's path: the HSS Invictus. Alone, cold, and silent, The massive ship hung between Earth and the Armada, unmoving and unreadable. No messages came from it, no threats, just presence, a warning written in metal and gravity. The Jatari didn't hesitate. They were used, to swift victories, to civilizations begging for mercy. With perfect coordination, the fleet opened fire. Thousands of energy beams lit up the darkness of space, followed by missiles that curved and twisted through the void, guided by technology. Far beyond human comprehension, explosions flashed as they reached their target, only to vanish. One by one, the weapons struck the Invictus, and one by one, they failed to leave a mark. There was no sound, no shudder, not even a flash of resistance. Everything simply disappeared. It was as if the ship existed in a space between reality and myth. Confused chatter filled Jatari command channels. Their best weapons, their strongest attacks, had done nothing. No human technology should have survived that, let alone stayed still as if mocking them. But the Invictus was no ordinary ship. At its core was the Aegis 9 core, a gravity manipulation device developed in secret and powered by something no Jatari scanner could identify. It bent the laws of physics, folding pressure and energy away from itself like ripples sliding off stone. Their weapons weren't blocked. They were redirected, absorbed, nullified before they could even touch the hull. Inside the Invictus, calm, ruled. Captain Elena Ward stood on the command bridge, eyes fixed on the stars beyond the glass, her voice steady as she gave no orders to fight back. Not yet. Around her, the crew worked in silent rhythm, trained for years for this one impossible moment. No one panicked. No one spoke of retreat. They watched as history changed in real time. For the first time, a human ship stood against the might of a galactic empire and didn't flinch. The Jatari fired again, this time with more force, desperation creeping into their flawless battle strategy. But the result was the same. Energy collapsed before it could make contact. Missiles vanished. Nothing worked. On board the Jatari flagship, commanders argued. Some believed the ship was an illusion. Others suspected it was bait. But none of their data made sense. Their scanners couldn't penetrate the ship's outer shell. They couldn't even confirm the material it was made from. It was like trying to scan a shadow with a mirror. Back on Earth, something changed. Fear began to fade. The people watching from across the world saw the Invictus not as a mystery, but as a symbol, a statement. Humanity had built something the galaxy had never seen before. Not out of arrogance, but out of necessity, out of hope, and out of the quiet understanding that peace was never promised. Suspense grew with every passing second the Invictus remained untouched. The world waited. Would it strike back? Would it speak? But it didn't need to. Its silence was louder than any weapon. And above them all, drifting calmly between Earth and destruction, the Invictus stood as a question the Jatari had never prepared to answer. What if humans were not just survivors, but something far more dangerous? Long before the Invictus stood between Earth and destruction, before its name was whispered in awe across the stars, there was a man whose ideas were laughed out of every hall, lab, and university he entered. Dr. Adrian Voss had once been a rising star in the world of theoretical physics, praised for his brilliance and daring concepts, until his work took a direction no one wanted to follow. He spoke of something he called event layer shielding, a way to bend gravitational fields to create impenetrable defense, not by resisting force, but by folding it away from existence entirely. His colleagues called it impossible. His funding disappeared. His lectures drew more mockery than curiosity. Then, without warning, Voss vanished. For 10 years, not a single soul saw him or heard a word. Many assumed he had given up, fallen into obscurity, or worse. But the truth was far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. Voss had not disappeared. He had been taken. Not by force, but by invitation. After Earth intercepted its first alien signal, buried in the background noise of a passing comet, a small secret team was dispatched to investigate strange readings on Mars. Beneath the planet's rust-red surface, they uncovered fragments of something ancient, not Martian, but alien, far older than any known civilization, possibly predating the galaxy's current star maps. Hidden within the fragments were traces of technology unlike anything on Earth, including materials that changed weight depending on how you looked at them, and thin metallic threads that still hummed with unknown energy. Voss was brought in, quietly, the only mind bold enough to try making sense of what they'd found. What he discovered would change everything. Inside those ruins was the answer to the very theory that had ruined his reputation. The fragments did not block energy. They folded it, reshaped it, made it vanish. Event layer shielding wasn't just possible. It had already existed once. For a decade, hidden beneath the ice-covered base of Antarctica, Voss worked in silence with a small, trusted team. There were no press releases, no open science journals. Every discovery was locked behind layers of security. The world believed he was gone. All the while, he was building the heart of the Invictus. The Aegis 9 core, based on the Martian fragments, was the first of its kind, a device that allowed the ship to remain untouched not because of armor, but because it bent the rules of impact themselves. And it didn't stop there. The ship's hull was designed using alien alloys mixed with Earth's rarest elements. Its weapons were built to send targeted gravitational bursts instead of traditional fire. Every inch of the Invictus was a message to the galaxy. Earth had caught up, and maybe, just maybe, leapfrogged ahead. Now, as the Jatari struggled to understand how their attacks were being ignored by what they saw as a primitive world, Voss sat alone in his private quarters aboard the Invictus, watching the data streams. His face was older now, sharper, with lines that told of sleepless nights and hard choices. But his eyes were alive, burning with thought, watching the galaxy react to the creation he had built in the shadows. Through a soft-spoken personal log, he recalled the first moment he held a fragment of the Martian tech in his hand, the way it seemed to hum like it remembered something. He spoke not of glory or revenge, but of responsibility, of preparing humanity for a future it didn't even know it was walking into. He knew the Invictus was only the beginning. If those fragments had come from something older than the Jatari, then there was more out there, more knowledge, more danger, more eyes watching Earth's sudden rise. And while the world saw him as a mad genius or a savior, Voss understood the truth. He wasn't trying to win a war. He was trying to prepare humanity for a test far greater than they could imagine. The Invictus was not just a weapon, it was a question hurled into the void. Are we ready? The silence after the failed Jatari assault was not a retreat. It was the sound of something ancient and powerful growing angry. Moments after their most advanced weaponry had vanished harmlessly against the Invictus's impossible shielding, the Jatari commanders issued Phase 2 of their invasion. Retaliation Protocol. This time, there would be no hesitation, no tests. They would unleash the full weight of their arsenal, a storm meant to shatter planets and rewrite orbits. Antimatter warheads were launched in synchronized waves, their paths folding through space itself to avoid interception. Alongside them, gravity mines stitched with space-folding tech detonated like silent whirlpools in the vacuum, tearing holes in localized dimensions. The plan was simple: trap the Invictus, crush it from all angles, and erase it before Earth could understand what had saved them. But the Invictus, cold and unmoved, remained untouched. Its Aegis 9 core, humming like a pulse through the void, bent reality away with calm precision. Every mine collapsed harmlessly. Every warhead blinked out the moment it neared the ship's layered gravitational shield. The Jatari had faced war before, but never against something that turned their best efforts into illusions. Then, for the first time, the Invictus moved. Not fast, not aggressively, but with purpose. As it turned, its weapon systems began to power up, systems built not just to destroy, but to demonstrate. On the bridge, Captain Elena Ward stood tall, her posture steady, her voice quiet but clear. She did not order a full attack. Instead, she gave a single command: fire the lance. From the center spine of the Invictus, a deep vibration echoed through the hull. Lights dimmed, and for a brief moment, it felt as if the ship held its breath. Then a single beam, thin as a needle but burning with white-blue intensity, tore through space. A graviton lance, focused and precise. It struck the Jatari flagship, a massive command vessel the size of a small moon, armored with layers of exotic metal and bristling with weapons. For one heartbeat, it shimmered. Then, without warning, the entire ship crumpled inward like paper folding into nothing. No explosion, no debris, just silence, as if the vessel had never been there at all. Panic spread through the remaining Jatari fleet. Their command was gone. Their strongest ship had been erased by a single shot. But the Invictus didn't continue its attack. It didn't pursue. Instead, Captain Ward issued a new series of calculated counterstrikes. Every burst of energy, every precision pulse was designed not to kill, but to disable. Engines were crippled. Weapon systems melted into useless slag. Communications went offline. The goal was not annihilation. It was understanding. Humanity was not here to conquer. They had simply drawn the line and refused to move. Within hours, dozens of Jatari ships floated powerless in space, caught in the net of Earth's silent guardian. Still, the Invictus never fired on life support systems. Escape pods were left untouched. Not one alien life form was lost. The message was clear: we will not kneel, but we will not become monsters. Across Earth, people watched through live military feeds, stunned and silent. This was not just survival, it was control. The Invictus was no longer defending Earth. It was shaping the rules of the battlefield. For the first time in history, a human voice had silenced a galactic empire, not with rage, but with restraint. And as the disabled Jatari fleet drifted silently through space, waiting for orders that would never come, one thing became certain. Earth was no longer just a planet. It had become a player. Somewhere deep within the Invictus, Dr. Adrian Voss monitored the gravitational ripples left behind by the lance, studying the quiet signatures of space folding around his ship. And in that moment, he smiled, not because of victory, but because the galaxy had finally heard humanity speak. And the voice it heard was strong, calm, and unbreakable. After the crushing silence of defeat, the Jatari changed their tone. Their fleet, now scattered and wounded, sent a formal transmission not of surrender, but of diplomacy. They offered a ceasefire, requesting a neutral ground to open peaceful talks, claiming they wished to avoid further bloodshed. The galaxy watched in disbelief as the once dominant power spoke words it had never used before. Captain Elena Ward received the message with narrowed eyes. She had fought too long and seen too much to believe in sudden change, but she also knew the importance of the moment. If Earth could stand in battle, it must now learn to walk in diplomacy. After careful deliberation with the Earth Defense Coalition and a small circle of Invictus senior officers, she agreed to meet, under strict conditions, at Station Helios, an ancient neutral platform drifting in the orbit of a cold white dwarf, used throughout the sector for peace talks that rarely ended in peace. The meeting was tense from the first moment. Captain Ward, clad in the deep gray uniform of the Invictus, command stood tall among the towering Jatari delegates, whose organic armor shimmered with adaptive color. They offered polite greetings, unfamiliar gestures of respect, and opened with statements about future cooperation and avoiding mutual destruction. But beneath their carefully chosen words, Ward sensed something strange, not just fear, but urgency, something deeper than survival. When she pressed them with quiet but direct questions, the truth finally cracked through their polished lines. The Jatari were not seeking peace out of wisdom. They were trying to buy time. 1. Of their envoys, older and more scarred than the others, leaned close during a private exchange and whispered the name Vorlax Continuum. Ward had never heard it before, but as the delegate spoke, she realized even the Jatari spoke the name with caution. They weren't just afraid of Earth's new weapon, they were terrified of what it might attract. The technology used in the Aegis 9 core, the same ancient fragments buried deep beneath Mars, was not Jatari in origin. It was much older. A remnant of something lost to myth, erased from record so long ago that only the oldest stars had seen its rise. The Vorlax Continuum had once ruled not with fleets, but with thought itself. Being so advanced, they no longer used ships, language, or time the way lesser species understood. They vanished long before the Jatari were born, leaving behind only ruins scattered across forgotten worlds. The tech Voss had awakened inside the Invictus had not just drawn Earth into the galactic stage, it had lit a beacon. The Continuum might have been asleep, or perhaps watching from a distance. But now, they would feel the ripple. The Jatari had hoped to crush Earth quickly, to silence the ancient signal before it could echo any louder. But they had failed. And now, the stars were stirring. Ward listened in silence, piecing together the terrible scope of what they had stepped into. The Invictus was not just a victory, it was a trigger. And while Earth had taken its first step into the stars with courage and strength, it had done so with ancient fire burning beneath its feet. She returned to her ship without signing anything, leaving the Jatari to whisper among themselves, unsure whether Earth would now be an enemy, an ally, or something more dangerous than either. Back on the bridge of the Invictus, she met with Dr. Voss, who already knew. His instruments had detected strange gravitational pulses across the void, patterns that didn't match any known fleet or natural phenomenon. Something was responding, something vast, and somewhere, in the cold black between galaxies, the Vorlax Continuum was listening. Earth had awakened more than a war. It had awakened a memory, and the stars, quiet for so long, had begun to whisper once more. They saw it long before they understood it. A shape slipped through the void like a shadow cast by no light, vast and silent, older than time itself. It was not a ship, not exactly. It was a continuum drone, and every sensor on every Jatari vessel screamed warnings before going dark. The drone paid them no attention. Entire fleets were beneath its concern. It drifted calmly into the battlefield, ignoring debris, warnings, and weapons. As it passed, even time seemed to slow, not because of power, but because of presence. Its surface shimmered with an unreadable alloy, patterns forming and collapsing in silence. It stopped only when it faced the HSS Invictus. Then, without threat, without sound, it began to scan. The crew froze. Weapon systems were armed but held back by Captain Ward's command. Dr. Adrian Voss stepped forward, heart racing, not with fear, but recognition. He knew this moment. The Invictus had been a message, and now something had finally answered. Without permission or hesitation, Voss opened a direct channel to the drone. He sent a signal, carefully modulated, built on the harmonic frequencies buried in the Aegis core's original fragments. To the shock of everyone on board, the drone responded. Not with language, not with threats, but with information. Endless. Streams of blueprints, historical data, memory echoes of galaxies long dead, and civilizations that had risen and fallen before Earth had even formed. In the silence of space, the continuum revealed something breathtaking. The technology humanity had built into the Invictus was never meant to be exclusive. It was a gift, or perhaps a test, seeded long ago by the continuum itself. They had once traveled across galaxies, planting pieces of knowledge inside young, struggling species, not to rule them, but to prepare them. The Aegis Core was one such seed, designed to remain dormant until a world was ready to awaken it. Earth had found it, Voss had understood it, the Continuum had watched. And now it had returned. The data was overwhelming. It showed how, millions of years ago, the Continuum had fought against forces that enslaved entire galactic arms, not with war, but with empowerment. They uplifted species in secret, giving them the means to resist without becoming monsters themselves. But something had gone wrong. The Continuum faded, perhaps by design, perhaps by sacrifice. Their tools remained buried, scattered across time. Most were never found. But humanity had found theirs. And now, they were being watched. The drone's final transmission was brief. A single message encrypted within layers of fractal code, which Voss decrypted after hours of silent study. The message read, "Prove that you are worthy of what you carry." The drone departed without another signal, vanishing into a fold of space as if it had never existed. In its place, only silence remained. The Jatari, watching from the edges of the system, did not approach. They had witnessed something far beyond their understanding, and they too were afraid, not of Earth, but of what Earth had now become part of. Captain Ward stood on the bridge, the words still echoing in her mind. Humanity had been given power not to conquer, but to rise. But now, they were not just protectors of Earth. They were carriers of a legacy. A challenge had been placed before them. The real enemy was not the Jatari. It was arrogance. It was fear. It was forgetting that power without purpose is just noise. As stars shifted in the darkness and new signals stirred from distant systems, Earth's place in the galaxy was no longer uncertain. It was tested. And somewhere deep inside the Invictus, the Aegis Core pulsed with a quiet rhythm, as if it too was waiting for what came next. The battlefield had gone quiet, but the echoes of what happened still rippled across the galaxy. The mighty Jatari Armada, once feared in every known system, now floated in silence, its warships disabled, its pride broken. No shots were fired anymore. There was no need. The HSS Invictus, still untouched, still radiant in the shadow of a fractured moon, had rewritten the rules of war, diplomacy, and power. But what came next wasn't about domination. It was about definition. Humanity had reached a moment that would define them not just for their generation, but for every future voice that would rise from Earth and beyond. With the Jatari silent and the mysterious Continuum watching from places unknown, the galaxy waited for humanity's next move. Would they rise as conquerors, or retreat into the shadows of fear? On the bridge of the Invictus, Captain Elena Ward knew this moment mattered more than any weapon or battle. She stood before the central command console, transmitting a signal, not just to the Jatari, but to every listening ear across dozens of systems. Her voice, calm and steady, traveled through space like a new anthem. "We are not conquerors," she said. "We are not prey. We are explorers, builders, defenders. We came to the stars with hope, and we brought strength only when we were forced. If you threaten us again, know this. Your entire armada couldn't even scratch our ship." The words landed like stone on water, unshakable, but spreading wide. Her message wasn't arrogance, it was truth, not a threat, but a boundary. Humanity had made its stand, not to rule others, but to refuse being ruled. And in that moment, something changed. The Invictus, forged in secrecy, once feared as a weapon too powerful to control, had become something else entirely, a symbol. Across Earth, its image lit up screens and skies, children pointing in awe, leaders silently nodding, knowing their people would never again be seen as small. On distant colonies and orbiting stations, engineers, scientists, and dreamers began speaking of something new, Not a warship, but a future. A fleet of vessels not for war, but for connection. Ships that could travel, protect, share, and learn. Inspired by the Invictus, but shaped by something more human. Hope. Even the Jatari began to change. A humbled species now stood at a crossroads of its own, some bitter, others curious. But many had seen the restraint of the Invictus, the humanity, in its crew, and wondered if perhaps there was a better way. Quiet diplomatic channels opened, small ones, but sincere. And deep beyond the rim of known space, where stars flickered in ancient patterns and gravity pulsed with secrets, the Vorlax continuum remained silent, but present, watching, waiting, not judging, but observing. As if their ancient seed, planted on a blue planet so long ago, had finally begun to bloom. Back on Earth, Dr. Adrian Voss walked alone through the great halls of the Invictus, passing glowing panels and quiet humming cores, the very heartbeat of the ship he had helped bring to life. His thoughts were not of war or victory, but of possibility. What else lay buried in their own history? What other gifts had humanity yet to discover, not from alien ruins, but from the minds and hearts of their own kind? The Invictus, for all its power, was only the beginning. The stars had once seemed so far away, cold, unreachable, silent. But now they felt close, alive. Not just destinations, but invitations. The legacy of Earth was no longer tied to survival or fear. It was carved into the void by action, honor, and unity. And in that silence between systems, as the Invictus drifted with purpose toward the next chapter of the human journey, the universe finally listened. Earth had spoken, and the stars, once distant strangers, now welcomed a voice that would never again be ignored.